Most High put together. We gon' see. In times.
Serpents lurking, watchers watching, YAHUAH stay on point. They lurking. We under the covenant, we ain't got no other choice. Gird your loins up, armor up, cause it's time for war. We the generation that's gon' get on one accord. Serpents lurking, watchers watching, YAHUAH stay on point. We under the covenant, we ain't got no other choice. Gird your loins up, armor up, cause it's time for war.
The festivals of Rome are innumerable, but 5 of the most important may be singled out for elucidation, viz. Christmas Day, Lady Day, Easter, the Nativity of St. John, and the Feast of Assumption. Each and all of these can be proved to be Babylonian. And first, as to the festival in honor of the birth of Christ, or Christmas, how comes it that the festival was connected with the 25th of December? There is not a word in the scripture about the precise day of his birth or the time of year when he was born. What is recorded there implies that at what time soever his birth took place, it could not have been on the 25th of December. December 25th stems all the way back to the beginning of civilization in ancient Babylon. During the winter solstice, according to mythology, that's the day when the sun began to regain its dominion and begin to conquer the night. Because during the winter solstice, that's the period when the night is at its longest extent throughout the whole year, and the day shone for the shortest amount of time throughout the whole year. So in a sense, there's this type of mythological battle going on between the sun and night. So what succeeded the winter solstice was a gradual increase of the sun going from its lowest point all the way up until the summer solstice, where it goes into its highest point. So the pagans back then took that as a sign that the sun was beginning to regain dominance over the night, and they began to make deities out of it. So for instance, you have the Egyptian god Horus, who was born on the winter solstice of December 25th. You have the Greek god Helios, who was born on the winter solstice of December 25th. You have the Greco-Roman god Apollo, who was born on December 25th. You got the Hindu god Mithra, who also was born on December 25th. And you got the demon of all demons, the deity named after Nimrod, Baal, who after Nimrod's death, he was deified by his mother Semiramis and turned and claimed that he became the sun god. He also was born on December 25th. The scholars know, and all the elite know, that December 25th has always been used as a pagan day to conjure up spirits and demons. It's always been used that way. So now what they did was take the Bible and infiltrate it and then put the name Christ over it and got the whole world conjuring up spirits and empowering demons on December 25th, when it has nothing to do with the birth of Christ at all. At the time that the angel announced his birth to the shepherds of Bethlehem, they were feeding their flocks by night in the open fields. Now, no doubt the climate of Palestine is not so severe as the climate of this country, but even there, though the heat of day be considerable, the cold of the night from December to February is very piercing, and it was not the custom for the shepherds of Judea to watch their flocks in the open fields later than about the end of October. What the Bible does say is that during the time of Christ's birth, the shepherds were outside feeding the flocks and grazing them by nighttime. And anybody in their right mind will tell you that there's no way shepherds are going to be outside in the dead of winter grazing flock in the blistering cold. The Bible does not substantiate a winter birth, because there's no way the shepherds would be outside grazing flock in the dead of winter. when it's blistering cold. I stay in Florida where they have mild winters, and there's no way, even in the wintertime, I'm going to be outside in the middle of the night grazing the flock. And I have sheep. There's no way I'm going to go out there and be grazing the flock. They're going to have to wait until the morning. At the birth of Christ, every woman and child was to go to be taxed at the city whereto they belonged, whether some had long journeys, but the middle of winter was not fitting for such a business, especially for women with child and children to travel in. Therefore, Christ could not have been born in the depth of winter. And during the time of Christ's birth, Mary and Joseph had to go back to their city to be taxed. The Romans had set up publicans all throughout the land of Israel to have the Israelites come and pay tribute to them. And there's no way in the world that the Romans would have set up a taxation time during the dead of winter, because back then they didn't have cars and stuff where you can jump in with a heater. People had to walk and had to go out however means necessary, but they didn't have heaters with them. So in the dead of winter, when it's blistering cold, that would not be a beneficial and an appropriate time to have people come all the way back to get taxed in their own cities. Zondervan Bible Compact Dictionary. Christmas, the anniversary of the birth of Christ, and its observance celebrated by most Protestants and by Roman Catholics on December 25th, by Eastern Orthodox churches on January 6th, and by the Armenian Church on January 19th. The first mention of its observance on December 25th is in the time of Constantine, about AD 325. The date of Christ's birth is not known. The scholars themselves know that Christ was not born on December 25th. They know that for a fact. That's factual to them. But what happens is the government sets up preachers to go out and tell you some fabricated lie and have you teaching and participating in satanic rituals while they sitting back twirling their thumbs because they know that they know the truth already. And while you over there conjuring up demons, they sitting back laughing, enjoying it, and getting power. Constantine himself knew when he set it up that Christ was not born on December 25th. He knew that. He knew that it was a pagan ritual that was passed down from the Babylonians to the Egyptians, to the Greeks, all the way down to the Romans. And that all he was going to do was compile it together and have all the Christians thinking that they worship in Christ, when he knew good and well that it had nothing to do with the birth of Christ. The governmental system today knows that it has nothing to do with Christ, but they're not going to say anything. They write it in the books, but they're not going to say anything because you are conjuring up spirits and giving power to the demonic forces that rule the earth. How then did the Roman Church fix on December the 25th as Christmas Day? Why thus, long before the 4th century and long before the Christian era itself, a festival was celebrated among the heathen at that precise time of the year, in honor of the birth of the son of the Babylonian Queen of Heaven. During the time of the Romans, they had a celebration during the same time of the year in December called the Saturnalia, where they would walk around and give each other gifts, sing songs, and have a bunch of orgies, a freak fest. It started out with 2 days, from December 17th to December 19th. Then it was extended to a week. So the Romans of antiquity were already celebrating Christmas before they knew anything about a Christ. The difference is they were celebrating and worshiping the Babylonian god Nimrod, reincarnated as Tammuz. They changed the name to Saturn. It's the same god, deified as the sun god. And they was paying homage and worshiping him at that time, before they had heard anything about a Christ. And if you know anything about history, Rome is the one who branched off and gave everyone their religion. Rome, that's where your Christian church comes from. That's where your Catholicism comes from. the Protestants, the Baptists, all those stem from pagan Rome. And that's where you get your Christmas from. They were celebrating Christmas before they heard anything about a Christ. They was already celebrating Christmas. And it may fairly be presumed that in order to conciliate the heathen and to swell the number of the nominal adherents of Christianity, the same festival was adopted by the Roman Church, giving it only the name of Christ. This tendency on the part of Christians to meet paganism halfway was very early developed. During the time of the Roman Emperor Constantine, Christianity had already been hijacked already. So Constantine had a diabolic plan to gain converts and to have all people come together under Christianity. But a lot of the pagans of Rome didn't want to come under the guidelines of Christianity at that time. So Constantine devised a plan and said, you know what? Don't worry about it. You like that Saturnalia? You don't have to give that up. We're going to incorporate that together with Christianity, and we're going to call it Christmas. So therefore, we can have the best of both worlds. We can have you still worshiping the god of Saturn, That's how large of a scale Saturnalia was. It was the most prominent festival of the Romans back then. And we find Tertullian, even in his day, about the year 230, bitterly lamenting the inconsistency of the disciples of Christ in this respect, and contrasting it with the strict fidelity of the pagans to their own superstitions. By us, says he, who are strangers to the Sabbaths and new moons and festivals once acceptable to God, the Saturnalia, the feast of January, the Brumalia, and Matronalia are now frequented. Gifts are carried to and fro. New Year's Day presents are made with din, and sports and banquets are celebrated with uproar. Oh, how much more faithful are the heathen to their religion, who take special care to adopt no solemnity from the Christians. Upright men strive to stem the tide, but in spite of all their efforts, the apostasies went on till the church, with the exception of a small remnant, was submerged under pagan superstition. Christianity had already been infiltrated heavily by Satan.
Hello everyone, Pastor Wagner again. Welcome to my weekly video blog. Well, as they say, 'tis the season as Christmas is approaching, and generally around this time of year, somebody will invariably ask what I'm going to do for Christmas, and when I tell them that I don't celebrate Christmas, that usually elicits some kind of a question as to, well, why not? That's kind of strange. Most people, especially Christians and preachers especially, would celebrate Christmas. And I usually answer that question with, I say, well, do you want the long answer or the short answer? And most people generally say, well, I'll take the short answer because, nobody wants a lengthy explanation of something, and religious topics tend to be controversial anyway. So my short answer is, well, the Bible forbids it. Well, that generally elicits a question for the long answer, because if it's a Christian, they'll say, well, wait a minute, or anybody for that matter, wait a minute, where does the Bible say that? Because I've never heard of that before. I say, well, that's the long answer. And would you like to hear it? And sometimes they want to hear it, sometimes they don't. But if they say yeah, then I usually go through this spiel that I'm about ready to go through with you to explain why I don't celebrate Christmas. And it would go something like this. Well, that's a good question. Where does the Bible forbid celebrating Christmas? But I guess a more important question would be, where does the Bible even talk about Christmas? Is the word Christmas even used in the Bible? Did any of the disciples or the apostles celebrate Christmas? Did Jesus celebrate Christmas? Did anybody do it in the Bible? Well, if you look through the Bible, you will indeed find that the word Christmas is absent. It's not found in there anywhere. Not only is the word not found, the whole concept is not found. Nowhere will you find anybody, any of the apostles, the disciples, anybody celebrating Jesus' birthday in the Bible, with the exception of the actual event when it happened. When the shepherds were abiding, watching their fields by night, they saw the star and all that kind of thing, and they came to worship the newborn Christ child afterwards. But anyway, and then, all that aside, that's the only time you're going to see anybody, quote, celebrating the birthday of Christ. Now, you would think if God wanted us to celebrate the birthday of Christ, that he would have, number one, told us when it is. And number two, he would have probably told us how he wants us to do it. You know, you would think that maybe you'd find it, a verse in one of Paul's epistles that says, "Now, brethren, on the 25th day of the last month of the year, I want you to go out in the forest, and I want you to cut yourself a tree, and I want you to bring it into your house, and I want you to deck it with silver and gold, and fasten it with hammer and nail, that it move not. And I want you to put white lights on it, which will be symbolic of Christ, who is the light of the world. And the evergreen tree would represent the eternality of God, brethren. I want you to put this in your house, and I want you to give each other gifts. Don't give Jesus gifts. He doesn't need any, but give each other gifts for his birthday." Yes, and I want you to burn the Yule log, brethren, and I want you to drink eggnog, and I want you to throw big office parties and have a bunch of drunk people running around naked. Yes, that's how I want you to celebrate the birthday of our Savior, brethren. Yes, and with holly, don't forget that, and mistletoe, of course. Yes. So make sure to do this, brethren, and especially make sure it is at the winter solstice, brethren. That's very important. But you know, we don't read anything about that, do we? I'm kind of being facetious, obviously, but there's really no mention of it, is there? No. And the reason is that Christmas wasn't even around back then. Christmas didn't come about until, 300 and some years after the birth of Christ. The disciples and the apostles never celebrated it. So where did Christmas come from? That's a good question. Well, if it's not Christian and if it's not biblical, where did it come from? Well, it came a long time prior to the coming of Christ. You see, around this time of year, pagan peoples, long before the birth of Christ, noticed something. They noticed that as the year progresses from June until December, the days get shorter and shorter and shorter. And it appears that the sun is dying at that time. And then it happens up until about the 21st or 22nd of December at the winter solstice. And at that point, the sun is at its lowest strength. The sun is in the sky the least amount of time, and the days are the shortest. And the pagan peoples thought that this was this cycle of nature. The sun had died, and then they noticed a few days later, maybe around December 25th, that, boy, the sun has regained his strength and the days are getting longer again. And they worship that holiday, the winter solstice, as the birth of the unconquered sun. It was called Natalis Solis Invicti. It was called the Feast of Saturn, or Saturnalia. And they did these things. So you say, well, what does that have to do with Christmas? Well, I'll get into that in a second. But so what they did was they celebrated this, and then what happened was the Catholic Church came along trying to convert the pagans, just like I talked about Halloween a couple weeks ago. The Catholic Church, in an effort to convert the pagans, said, well, the pagans aren't going to they don't want to give up these fun holidays. I mean, boy, office Christmas parties are fun, and running around drunk and naked and all this kind of stuff. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? So they said, you know what we'll do? If you can't beat them, we'll join them. And what we'll do is we will bring in Saturnalia and Natalis Solis Invicti. We'll bring it into Catholicism, into the Catholic Church, but we'll just change the name of it. And instead of calling it that, we'll call it Christ's Mass or Christmas. And then the pagans really don't have to change anything. They can do what they've always done. We'll just call it Christ's Mass. We'll say it's the birthday of the S-O-N Son, not the S-U-N Son. And, just give it Christian terminology, and we'll Christianize it. Why not? And I'm not making this stuff up. I'll just give you a couple of quotes here from what actually happened. This is from the source of all wisdom and knowledge, from Wikipedia. I speak in jest, obviously. But there's lots. I have some Encyclopedia Britannica quotes, and if you do any research on your own, the internet is full of this stuff. You'll find out all kinds of stuff that you might never have known about the origin of Christmas. But anyway, here we go. It says, in Roman times, the best-known winter festival was Saturnalia, which was popular throughout Italy. Saturnalia was a time of general relaxation, feasting, merrymaking, and cessation of formal rules. Holly was also considered the key symbolic plant of the god Saturn and festival. I wonder where deck the halls with boughs of holly comes from. Yeah, it doesn't come from Jesus. Hate to tell you. It included the making and giving of small presents. Well, that didn't come about with the birthday of Jesus either. That was long predating it. including small dolls for children and candles for adults. During Saturnalia, business was postponed and even slaves feasted. Kind of sounds like most businesses nowadays that take off the week between Christmas and New Year's. There's nothing new under the sun. There was drinking, gambling, and singing, and even public nudity. My, sounds like an office Christmas party, doesn't it? It was the, quote, best of days, according to the poet Catullus. Saturnalia honored the god Saturn and began on December 17th. The festival gradually lengthened until the late Republican period when it was 7 days, December 17 through 23. In imperial times, Saturnalia was shortened to 5 days. Here's another quote from Wikipedia. This is about the Roman festival, Natalis Solis Invicti. It says the Romans held a festival on December 25th called Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the, quote, birthday of the unconquered sun. The use of the title Sol Invictus allowed several solar deities to be worshipped collectively. Well, my, weren't they nice and ecumenical back then, huh? Nothing's changed. Including Ella Gabal, a Syrian sun god, Sol, the god of the Emperor Aurelian, AD 270 to 274, and Mithras, a soldier's god of Persian origin. Emperor Elagabalus, 218 through 222, introduced the festival, and it reached the height of its popularity under Aurelian, who promoted it as an empire-wide holiday. So these things go way back, have nothing to do with Christianity whatsoever. So how in the world did this end up being Christmas? Well, here we have it. Here's out of the horse's mouth itself, the Catholic Encyclopedia. If you ever want any anti-Catholic material, go right to the Catholic Encyclopedia. They condemn themselves on a regular basis. It's a wonderful document to have. The Catholic Encyclopedia says, the well-known solar feast of Natalis Solis Invicti, Nativity of the Unconquered Sun, celebrated on 25 December, has a strong claim on the responsibility of our December date, speaking of Christmas. They admit that it was Natalis Solis Invicti, and that's why we have Christmas. They just changed the name. Here we go again. This is from the World Book Encyclopedia, from a secular source. In AD 354, Pope Liberius of Rome ordered the people to celebrate on December 25th. He probably chose this date because the people of Rome already observed it as the Feast of Saturn, celebrating the birthday of the sun, S-U-N. Christians honored Christ instead of Saturn as the light of the world. Isn't that nice? So you might say, well, you know, what could be wrong with that? I mean, what could be wrong with taking some evil pagan celebration and changing it to a Christian one and Christianizing it? What could be wrong with that? And people had those ideas. Here's a quote from Pope Gregory of Augustine in 597 AD. He said, do not destroy the temples of the English gods. Change them to Christian churches. Do not forbid the harmless customs which have been associated with the old religions. Consecrate them to Christian uses. Oh, you know, those harmless customs like burning your children in the fire. Don't worry about those things. Just consecrate them to Christian uses. Oh yeah, that's a great idea, isn't it? So right there out of the horse's mouth, the Catholic Church admits to doing this, taking these pagan holidays and Christianizing them, or Catholicizing them, we would say. So the problem with that, though, is that the Bible forbids it, and that's why my short answer to the question of why I don't celebrate Christmas is the Bible forbids it. Go back to the Old Testament, and then I'll give you some New Testament ones as well. Whenever Israel was going to go into the land of Canaan, when they were going to inherit the promised land, there were a bunch of wicked nations in there, and God knew that if they went in there and if they adopted those customs, or they would definitely have the opportunity and the temptation to adopt those customs and to worship God the way that those nations worshipped him. And he said, don't do it. Do not do it. Deuteronomy 12:29 through 32. When the Lord thy God shall cut off the nations from before thee, whither thou goest to possess them, and thou succeedest them, and dwellest in their land, take heed to thyself, that thou be not snared by following them, after that they be destroyed from before thee, and that thou inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. That is precisely what the Catholic Church did. They would go into new lands, they would proselytize them, and in order to convert the pagans, they'd say, well, how do these nations serve their gods? We will serve our God likewise. We're just going to change the name. That's exactly what they did. But what does God say? Verse 31, thou shalt not do so unto the Lord thy God, For every abomination to the Lord which he hateth have they done unto their gods. For even their sons and their daughters have they burnt in the fire to their gods. You don't consecrate wicked pagan religion and call it Christian. You don't do that. The things that the Gentiles sacrifice, we read in 1 Corinthians 10, the things that the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice unto devils and not unto God. And Paul says, I would not that ye have fellowship with devils. Verse 32, what things soever I command you, observe to do it, thou shalt not add thereto, nor diminish from it. God says, you do what I tell you to do, and you don't add anything in there, like Christmas, like Easter, like Halloween, and you don't take anything from it either. You just do it just how I said, and you don't worship me the way that the nations worship their gods. People say, well, my, that's kind of harsh. Yeah, well, that's Christianity. If you don't like it, go find another religion. You don't want to worship God the way that he does? Well, then go do it your own way. But don't pretend that it's Christian. Look at what God told Jeremiah here. Jeremiah wrote, he said in verse 10, Jeremiah 10, 2 through 4, you tell me what this sounds like to you. Jeremiah 10, 2 through 4, thus saith the Lord, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed at them. Oh, like maybe the sun dying towards the end of the year at the winter solstice, and then being dismayed at that, and then when the sun rebirths, then having some kind of celebration of that. Yeah, don't do that. For the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. My, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? They deck it or decorate. Go look at the definition. To deck is to decorate. They deck it with silver and gold. Kind of sounds like tinsel, doesn't it? They deck it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. Now, what does that sound like to you? What does that sound like? My, it sounds very similar to people going in the forest and cutting themselves a green tree, bringing it into their house, fastening it down with hammers and nails so it doesn't fall over, decorating it with silver and gold and with candles and such. Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. This is speaking of making an idol, but boy, doesn't it apply to cutting a green tree, bringing it into your house, and decorating it. That's exactly what it's talking about, doing such things. It's idolatry. It's idolatry. And God says, learn not the way of the heathen. Don't do that, God says. And you say, well, those are all Old Testament examples. Yeah, like God only prohibited idolatry in the Old Testament, but he's cool with it now. No, he's not cool with it. God still hates idolatry. Look over here in the New Testament. 2 Corinthians chapter 6. God is just as abhors this kind of thing in the New Testament, just like he did back there in the Old Testament. It says in 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 14, be not equally yoked together with unbelievers, for what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what concord hath and what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? What part hath Christ with Saturnalia? What part hath Christ with Natalis Solis Invicti? What part? None. He doesn't have any part of it. What agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God, as God hath said, I will dwell in them, and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. And I will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord. It says in Revelation, come out of her, my people. This is a Catholic, pagan, superstitious holiday. It is not Christian. Do you know that Christians didn't celebrate Christmas until about 150 years ago or so? Christians, I'm talking about Christians, Baptists, and even most Protestants did not celebrate Christmas. It was illegal in this country way back in the 1600s. It was illegal in this country to celebrate Christmas. John Calvin made it illegal in Geneva, I believe it was, to celebrate Christmas. They realized it was a pagan, wicked holiday that Christians shouldn't celebrate. I'm not for laws banning it or anything like that, but just to show you what the culture thought of it. The Christian culture in this country a long time ago banned it as illegal. You were fined for celebrating Christmas. They knew it was a Catholic pagan holiday. They knew it wasn't Christian. Somehow that's changed. Look in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, the verse that I quoted here a minute ago. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 20. Paul says, but I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils and not to God. And I would that ye should And I would not that ye should have fellowship with devils. Ye cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. Ye cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and of the table of the devils. You can't do it. You can't have it both ways. You cannot bring in paganism into Christianity and claim to be worshiping the Son of God and honoring his birth. You can't do that. Those pagan holidays were worshipped unto devils and not to God. You cannot worship the devil and claim you're worshiping Jesus Christ and his birth. You may not know, you may not remember what those pagan holidays were, but God remembers. God remembers those heathen, pagan, devil-worshipping nations and all that they were doing. God knows. You may not remember, but he does. We have to keep the ordinances as delivered. You have to do it the way that God says if you want to please him. 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 2, Paul says, Now I praise you, brethren, that ye remember me in all things and keep the ordinances as I delivered them to you. Do it the way that God says. Paul never delivered us an ordinance to celebrate the birthday of Christ on December 25th. Now, we ought to celebrate Christ's birth every day. Honor him as your Savior, as the Son of God, for saving your miserable soul. Yeah, we ought to do that every day. But there is no special celebration, and especially a pagan holiday, Christianized. There is no such thing. Jesus said in Matthew 28, in verse 20, he said to do it the way that he said to do it. Matthew 28 and verse 20, the disciples were supposed to go and baptize all nations. In verse 20, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I'm with you and always, even unto the end of the world. All things. Teaching them all things whatsoever. All things says you can't leave anything out. Whatsoever says you can't add anything to it. Do it just the way he said it. And he certainly never commanded us to celebrate Christmas or anything of the like.
That's essentially what happened. And now you left doing satanic worship. That's how clever Satan is. He done slithered his way all the way into Christianity, and nobody would ever take the time to look and say, you know what, let me find you. Everybody looking for Satan somewhere else. Maybe Satan over here. When Satan got his home base and headquarters right in Christianity. He got everybody deceived. Revelations 12 verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. When he operating right there in Christianity, no holds barred. He got you celebrating. He got you celebrating Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, Valentine's Day, all Babylonian customs, satanic worship, rituals on a high demonic level. Now, and with that said, most people are still going to go and participate in that ritual. With everything being said, and they're going to try to rationalize it in their mind and make an excuse and try to say, oh, well, I'm doing it because of the family. No, you're not doing it. You're doing it is because they've been tampering with the brain waves, and they make it to where you think that you have to do this ceremony, or people going to look at you crazy. They start softening you up with Christmas carols. Everybody start acting funny around the Christmas time. All of a sudden, everybody's in this giving mood and nice and want to give hugs and kisses. Why? Because they socially and they're psychologically programming you to act that way and to give. They preparing you slowly to get ready to partake in this ritual that you will do at the end of the month. December 25th, faithfully. You're going to go, you're going to sit down with your whole family and open up presents, and you're going to be doing it in the name of Satan, disguised as Christmas or the worship and the birth of Christ, when it has nothing to do with that at all. Everybody getting all nice and friendly for the holiday season. What about the rest of the months? Why nobody's friendly then? Because Christmas is on a high demonic level. And the elite know that, and they got you partaking. Like I said, most people are still going to go do it, and that's fine. If you want to go and celebrate Christmas and worship Satan directly on a high level, I have no problem with that. That's your prerogative. I don't have a problem with it. But the Most High God, He has a problem with it. Because you can live it up all you want, have as much fun, crack open as many gifts as you want, decorate as many trees, put as many stars on the top of the trees, kiss as many people under the mistletoe all you want. You can do that for your whole life. That don't got nothing to do with me. But once you enter into the grave and your spirit goes back to the Most High, you got to stand and face Him yourself. And I can tell you right now, you don't want to face Him and you've been celebrating and worshiping Satan. Hebrews 10 verse 31. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, because you're going to have to answer for it.
He gon' send his hand, destruction gotta come, that's how he get us out this lane. The devil working hard, trying to get us out his plane. His sheep hear his voice, so he can't get us out his hand. We gon' trust the Son of Man, blow your wings, Father. Your kingdom coming, we just trying to make it in, Father. Rather we